and we'll move through. Thank you, Sharon, much appreciated. And I do appreciate everybody's patience and understanding with us tonight. Hopefully we won't have any more problems. I won't turn into the robot voice again, and we'll be off and running. Thanks. First of all, yes, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on, or acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're meeting on today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also acknowledge my gratitude that we share this land today, my sorrow for some of the costs of that sharing, and my hope and belief that we can move to a place of equity, justice and partnership together. Thank you. So welcome everybody. This is a presentation on foster care, and we will speak both, as I said to Sarah before, both about specialist and general care. By way of introductions, my name is Avril Hale and I am a program manager. I used to be a program manager, and I'm now the, goodness gracious, I've been carer practice manager and responsible for doing these fantastic presentations. This is my first one, and so thank you very much for your patience with me. It's going to, it's a little bit bumpy start to the ride, but that's, as I said, it's Murphy's Law. And also with me tonight is the wonderful Kerry Curry, who is a program manager, but also a specialist foster carer. And I'll just let Kerry introduce herself a little bit about what she does and her history of foster care.
Hi everyone, as Avril said, my name's Kerry Curry. I'm a program manager in our Child, Youth and Family team for South Australia. I have been with the organisation now for 13 years and held a variety of positions in that time, from a child and family practitioner, a lot of training, doing some assessments, and then now in the program manager role. I'm also a specialist foster carer, so my husband and I have 5 children of our own, and we've got a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old foster child. Our 10-year-old has some very high and complex medical needs and a disability. That's what makes her specialist. So I'm happy to answer anybody's questions at all tonight if you've got anything that you would like to ask me. And hope you enjoy tonight's presentation.
Thanks, Kerry. So in terms of housekeeping, as if there is connectivity issues, which you can always click back on the link again. Whilst if you lose your connection, you can just click back on the link that was sent to you to get back in. And we will use the chat box a little bit to be able to ask a few questions and whatnot. Now if we could go to the next slide. One of the first questions that I have for everyone is, okay, I don't have my notes now, so it's a bit difficult for me to think, where is it that you're watching this particular session from? This was advertised statewide, so we might have some people from far and wide, or perhaps just close by.
If you can pop your suburb in the chat box, that'd be great. Thank you.
Ardrossan. That's Mount Barker. Oh yes, we do need more carers out in the Mount Barker region.
Absolutely.
Right, and that's the next question for the chat box is Interstate. Penny, welcome from Interstate. You win the prize for being the furthest away. If you could just also put in the chat box about how long you might have thought about being a foster carer. We have some people that sort of spontaneously click that they want to be involved and know about it, and others that spend a lot of time deliberating over whether or not foster care is for them. So if in the chat box you might put how long you might have been thinking about foster care. One to 2 years is a very standard. It's either spontaneous or it's usually around 1 or 2 years that people sit and contemplate to see whether or not foster care might fit in their lives. So that all sort of fits within the standard statistics and parameters that we've got. If we could have the next slide, thank you. Now, I wish I'd gone through this slide about 700 times so that I absolutely understood where we were and knew this PowerPoint back to front, but it'll take me a few goes through it, I think, to know it back to front. First of all, I just want to talk about Life Without Barriers as an organisation, because we're a lot bigger than just foster care. We are a social purpose organisation that's a national organisation working with more than 500 communities across Australia, about 23,000 people that we work with and work for us in the disability, foster disability, aged care, supporting NDIS, asylum seekers, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We also have work with the homelessness or people at risk of being homelessness, and are very loud and strong advocates for families and individuals who find themselves, for whatever reason in their life, suffering from various levels of social exclusion. So here, particularly in South Australia, these are the areas that we are that we work with, which is, of course, foster care. That's both with residential care in transitions from care and family-based foster care specialist in general. We have our disability services, which is disability support, and then also NDIS support. We work with refugee and asylum seekers. We've got a homelessness program, youth justice and mental health programs. We've got an aged care program. And of course, overarching all of this is our commitment to working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to give them better access and stronger connections into services that they might otherwise struggle to get into. We have this list of values here that we all do work from very strongly, which is, of course, at the core of everything. We have a commitment to building relationships. We get imaginative about that and are respectful and responsive and very courageous about making sure that we are meeting the needs of the people that are seeking our services. Really, the answer is in our name, Life Without Barriers. It's what we're committed to doing. If you find that you've got structural, organisational, whatever barriers you have, anybody has to accessing standard services in our society, that's what we're about. I've still got the blue wheel of death. In particular with children, we have a very strong mission statement with regard to the work that we do with children and young people, and we offer support to children and young people in care. We want each and every one of those children to feel safe and respected as they should, and we all have a responsibility to make sure that their safety comes first and that they're well cared for, protected from abuse, and given the respect that they deserve. If I can have the next slide, please, Sharon. Thank you. So we'll get into now what is foster care. which is the temporary or permanent placement of children who cannot live with their biological family, generally their birth parents, with either birth parent. Foster care's where we can provide a safe and caring environment, generally while the Department for Child Protection here in South Australia makes assessments and decisions as to what and how to move forward to ensure a child is in the best place possible. Foster care goes from just one night, can be just overnight in an emergency situation, and stretches right through until a young person turns 18 and becomes independent. From there, there are two types of different types of foster care. If we could have the next slide from that. We've got short-term. So we've got our respite program, emergency or crisis care program, which in those in the emergency and crisis care is right at the point where a young person needs to be taken to a place that's safe. So that could mean phone calls in the middle of the night to say, have you got a bed? Are you able to look after a young person? And then over a period of 7 days, the department works to find the best placement for that young person. Then if that moves into short term, or it might be the child moves to a short term placement while the department does those assessments that I was talking about. And then usually also in the short term space, the department continually looks for family members to place the child with. All of the statistics and research suggests that a young person who's not able to live with a birth parent, their next best option is to be with family, extended family of some description. So kinship foster care is most definitely one of the first things that the department will try and do, is find someone within the network of that family that can provide a connection for that child right through all of this time. And then we've got the long-term foster care, which sits once the department's made all of their assessments, and if it is assessed that it's not safe for a young person to return to their biological family, then orders are sought and long-term care until a child turns 18. Quite often the case is that child comes into your family as a foster care child, but becomes part of the family, and so beyond 18 still has a connection and stays and is part of the family. My personal, I do have a foster brother myself. He's now in his late 40s, and he most definitely is my brother. So he's been around ever since he was 18 months old in our family, and he still is a very integral part. And then we have the respite care, which is foster carers. We do have some foster carers that just provide respite, which is generally weekend and school holiday care, or situations in an emergency where a carer is unable or needs to do something, so a young person can go and spend some time, generally and ideally with a regular foster respite carer, but sometimes in an emergency situation, just someone who can hold that child for a day or two whilst whatever's happening gets sorted. We can move to the next slide. So there's two main differences to foster care. One is the type and length of stay, which I've gone through all of that. So these next few slides will just flip through really quickly. And then the other type is the complexity of needs, which I'll go into more detail once we get to that bit. So as I said, the length and type of stay, if we click to the next slide, is the short-term and the emergency care that I said, and then the long-term care after that on the next slide. Thanks, Sharon. And respite care and weekend school holiday care. And then the other type of foster care is the complexity level, which is where we talk about the specialist and general, the difference between specialist and general foster care. So first of all, we have the general placement or general foster care, which if we could just go, but yeah, thanks, Sharon. So general foster care is essentially a young person that doesn't have particularly complex needs. They might be a little bit unsettled from the experience of having to leave the home of their biological parent. But for the most part, they've got full school attendance. There aren't any major health concerns. There's no developmental issues. There's nothing sort of really outstanding that just focused and attuned parenting from a therapeutic perspective wouldn't fix. So it's pretty standard behaviour. Inevitably, all of our children that come into care do have a certain level of complexity simply because they've come from a place where they've had to be removed or have been moved from their biological family. However, there are varying types of complexity. So, and then we have our specialist young children. Now, these are young people with much more complex needs, which could be either learning difficulties, a lot of communication difficulties and intellectual disabilities, but then also physical and major health concerns and issues. And then we've got the more complex and challenging behaviours. And then, of course, we've got those that tick every box and have all of those situations. Increasingly, just before NDIS came on board, just as a curiosity before and while NDIS is now starting to, right at the start, of course, NDIS was a bit of a nightmare, but what we were finding before there were these big healthy packages to help families look after young people with learning disabilities and physical issues, we were finding a lot of parents were relinquishing care of their children because they were unable to provide or meet the physical or developmental needs of the children. So it wasn't necessarily child protection issues that were the issue or the reason why a child came into care. It was simply the fact that they could not access services to meet the needs of that child. Now that NDIS is on board, and as they're starting to get better, I won't say that there aren't significant challenges with NDIS still, but certainly we're seeing less and less families really struggle wanting to relinquish care of their person that's got strong disabilities. So when you do provide care for a young person that is considered a specialist child, you do get a much higher and more intense service from us. So as a specialist foster care, you do need to be more available in terms of being able to attend multiple medical or assessment appointments, therapeutic appointments. Some of our young people in specialist that require specialist care are unable to attend school full time. So it does require foster carers to be really committed to be able to just sort of down tools and move to focus solely on the young person that they're providing care for. As a result, the reimbursement for specialist care is a bit higher, and some specialist carers do find that reimbursement actually provides them the flexibility with employment to be able to either work part-time or sometimes stop working, because the reimbursement kind of helps out a bit in that space. It's certainly not an enormous level, and there is out-of-pocket expenses that we do advocate strongly for the department to help with, but there is a higher reimbursement for specialist care. You also, as an agency, we provide a more regular intensive support with regular fortnightly home visits to the placement to speak and coach carers with regard to therapeutic care and therapeutic responses to behaviours and issues. And we also have quite a strong training packages as well that provides access to more. The training is most definitely available to our general carers as well, but we do with the more intensive support in home with our carers and child and family practitioners. There's more coaching and training that can happen around responding appropriately. So on the next, now we'll talk about why children come into care. I've kind of covered off a little bit on this in some instances. the reasons include, of course, predominantly abuse and neglect, where it's not safe for a young person to stay. We do have a number of situations where we've got young people who have to come into care because their parents are unwell or dying, terminal, and so we provide, and they don't have a wider family network. As we become more isolated in society, of course, we lose contact with family members or move away, and sometimes we don't have that family network that can step in at times like that. And then there's also families that are unable to provide care for their young children, which are those ones with significant health and medical needs sometimes, but also mental health issues, poverty, domestic violence, things like that makes it very difficult for some of our families. So the next slide, I wonder if you might pop in the box there and show us your biggest guess is how many children you think are currently in foster care in Australia, or what we call out-of-home care. There's different types of care, but residential care, foster care, how many children do you think?
Good answer, Paula.
Too many, yes. 100,000. All right, not quite as many of those, Penny, in across Australia, but Sarah seems to be one that's getting fairly close to the mark. If we go to the next slide, you wouldn't believe it, but my slideshow has just opened up. So we hover around fairly standardly around 45,800, 46,000 children and young people in care in Australia as a whole. In South Australia, that sits at around 4,500 on any given year. Children, of course, coming in and out of care in a lot of situations. So from that, those 45,000 children, this source was, as you see down the bottom of that slide, was in 2018. There is an anticipated spike about to happen because of COVID and the difficulties that people are facing in terms of mental health, poverty, domestic violence, having been forced into sort of more isolated pockets. So we are anticipating a spike, which is one of the reasons why we're doing great big recruitment runs across the state to try and anticipate this, this need for young children to have foster care placements. If we could have the next slide. There's around about, and the next one after that, 70,000 calls made to the child abuse report line every year, and from that you find that we have and now that, yes, that particular slide and statistics I've totally forgotten, so if I now have here, would you believe, so we get about, out of that 70-odd thousand a year, once a week we get about 100 requests asking if we have placement for a young person, and those 100, the majority of them we have to at the moment say no to, that we don't have enough foster carers to be able to place, and that includes little children just in hospital, you know, just born, right up to 17 or 18 year or just before 18-year-olds, 16, 17-year-olds. At the moment, we do have a shortage of foster carers. We do have, and you do hear in the media, a lot of foster carers are saying, you know, I've got space, I can, you know, have another child, because of the rigorous matching processes that go to make sure that we're making decisions that are right for young children. Sometimes, even though a carer might have a room and the capacity to be able to have another child, finding that match that works for that family can take quite a long time to do. So we're just forever looking for and trying to bring foster carers into our community. So if we go next to the next is a graph which generally shows in a year the types of abuse and neglect, physical abuse and sexual abuse, and the percentages that bring children into care. Outstandingly, emotional abuse and neglect is together as the most predominant reason why children come into care. And a lot of that, I like to sort of really remind people in this space that 99.9% of parents don't wake up in the morning with an intention to hurt or abuse their child. And a lot of it is around circumstances and situations that that parents are put in, or their own experiences that mean that they have shortfalls in understanding how it is that they need to provide care. You know, the Parenting 101 handbook is sometimes not able to be understood in circumstances. So emotional abuse and neglect, which is quite often unintentional. However, of course, the outcomes for those young children is that intergenerational situation where young people don't meet their, their potential because they're unable to be provided with the right support to get there. So if we now move into the next thing, which is kids in foster care need someone who's able to meet and help them meet that potential. So we'll just go into the different types. So the fundamental task in foster care, of course, is to provide a safe environment, to form positive and nurturing relationships with a child, and to help them build new skills which enable them to manage life and events successfully. Sorry, tripping over my words now. These are the qualities that we look for in the assessment. And right now I'm about to give you all of the answers to the test, right through the assessment, right from the moment if you fill in that call me back form, right from the very get-go. These are the things that our assessment team is looking for, and they are people that are really naturally warm and nurturing in their style, in their communication style, that they have altruistic intentions. The research is out that you do need to be a bit of an idealist as a foster carer to really sort of feel that you can give in a space that is very difficult to give. To be curious, a natural curiosity around why a child, or what sits underneath a child's behaviour, or what sits underneath their needs. To be very flexible, as I said before, to be able to drop everything and focus and be attuned to the child in those moments where they really need someone to listen. To be inclusive of birth family, to not be judgmental of that birth family, in a sense that there are reasons why they are unable to meet the needs of that child, and to be able to understand overwhelmingly that our young people who are in out-of-home care have a much better outcome in their lifetime if they have a connection to their family, even if that family has been particularly negative. If we don't provide those connections early on, when a child hits adolescence and starts to try and understand who they are as a young adult, they inevitably will seek their birth family to find those answers. So we do need to, right from the start, be understanding and inclusive of our birth families, to be sensitive to those things that sit around that, and also for carers to be willing to invest time and money. It is caring for a child is, I can't remember the statistics or the numbers that were involved with what it costs to raise a child these days. Of course, we add foster care to that, and there's all sorts of other, investment that comes out of that. So your time and inevitably out of pocket to some degree when they become part of your family. The other thing that I put on my slideshow for this particular section here is to be really open-minded about parenting differently. If you're sitting here and you're already a parent of a young person, or have parented young people to adulthood and have done so really successfully, what has worked for you in that space will not necessarily work in parenting styles with children who are in out-of-home care or in foster care. We provide an enormous amount of training about different parenting approaches and styles and therapeutic approaches to care, which are very counterintuitive and sit very much against, very different to your standard parenting methods. So to be open-minded and willing to try things, even if you're a bit skeptical about it. So right through, those are the sort of things in the questions and all of the interviews that we have is what we talk about and what we look for in our carers as we're moving through assessment. So from there, who can be a foster carer? Well, pretty much just about everybody can be a foster carer. They do say that you need to be, and the starting point is over 25. However, that is negotiable if you've got a certain amount of, a backstory or understanding. That definitely doesn't preclude you, if you're under 25, preclude you from consideration. The one thing that I suppose does really stick a spanner in the works when you're wanting to become a foster carer is if you don't have a spare room in your home. You absolutely, children that come into foster care require, the foster carer needs to have a spare room for that child, because the child needs to have their own personal space and somewhere that they can feel is, primarily their own. So if you don't have a spare room, but you are looking at building and you're going to have a spare room or something, it doesn't stop you from applying, but it will be something that stops it from going right through until we're able to establish a space for the child. But you can be a single, you can be a couple, you can be in a same-sex relationship. You can be, there's 50, I think it's 56% of foster carers are over the age of 55. And certainly we do look at age is not an issue. Any culture, absolutely, with or without children. And also to be well and have the emotional capacity. So you also must be, sort of in relatively good health. There's a health check. And again, that doesn't preclude you if you do have an ongoing illness or health concern, providing that's well managed, it doesn't stop you from being considered as a foster carer. And availability, the assessment process is quite intensive, and you do need to be able to make yourself available to be considered or assessed in that space. So moving on from there is how we support foster carers. So we, on the next slide, we have, for most of all of both general and specialist carers get a certain level of all of this here. So first of all, we have a 24/7 support line, which is a phone number that you can phone at any time out of hours to speak with a child and family practitioner who's able to meet your needs, in quick questions, or to intervene in a crisis, give you some quick tips and points. And then also you've got your child and family practitioner, which is part of the care team. And the care team is the departmental workers, any specialists or therapists that are working with the child, all come together relatively regularly with you as a carer to work out the best levels of support that's needed. We also at Life Without Barriers have a clinical support team. For specialist care, that's clinicians that can come into the home and work with either the carer or can also work with a young person. And then in the general foster care space, they're a bit of a consultancy. So the child and family practitioners can speak with the clinical support team to get some ideas on how to support in a general placement. Of course, then there's the reimbursements, which for general is a pretty standard reimbursement that I think the department says covers out-of-pocket expenses for the most part. And then, of course, the higher level of reimbursement for specialist. We've got the employee assistance program, which again is up to, I think it's 6 sessions of therapeutic support, whether that's in a family situation or individually as carers. We put on a lot of social events, especially during the school holidays where possible. We have family fun days and barbecues, Christmas parties. We've got a living arts team that does a lot of art and crafty stuff around that, and Foster Carers Week and things like that. We do try to bring our carers together into a community a little bit more. We provide or offer respite where possible. In some situations, it's not possible. So we are working with the department to become and be able to be more flexible around providing foster care in all different types of spaces, but respite is something that you're entitled to and the child's entitled to. And we have our learning and development programs, which are face-to-face training, as well as our online My Learning portal, which there are a number of, we've got a huge library of programs and learning modules to go through to work to best find out how to work best with the young person that's in your care. So it's a lot. We do provide quite a bit, and I'm quite proud of the way that the service that we provide. So from here, if you do decide that this might be something that you want to explore, we'll now just quickly run through the process. I think, Sarah, this is what you might have been asking for. We got there in the end. So to become a foster carer, the process is, first of all, and if we can flip through quickly, thank you. You are here in the inquiry stage right now. You've got the info night. And then if in this, you want to click on the link that Kerry puts in the chat screen to go and do the callback, you'll have a phone interview. And then once that gets sent here to our assessment team, we arrange with you a bit of a home visit to come and have a little bit more of a chat about foster care. And then there's an orientation training course, which is a 2-day course. This is where your availability is essential to be able to attend a course called Shared Lives, Shared Stories, or Shared Stories, Shared Lives. I can't remember which way around that goes. It's a 2 full-day course. We do feed you through that. We try to do it out of hours and with as many options as we can. We've also, since COVID's come along, managed to split it across 4 evenings as well, to be able to offer in-home, webinars with this great internet connectivity that we seem to be experiencing right now. So that's the inquiry stage. And if after you've done that orientation course, you're still raring to go and you want to go through the assessment process, we have the screening stage. This is the bit that's quite time intensive to some degree, and it's where all the paperwork takes place. So we've got application forms to fill in, consents for us to do police checks and child protection checks. Those there, then the health checks that I spoke about earlier with regard to if you don't have any health issues, I think it's just a quick self-assessment. And then if there are some health concerns, a doctor, there's a standard form that gets filled in by a doctor, your local GP. And then we do a household safety check, which then provides you with a list of things that if the house isn't quite up to standards, the basic standard of care that the department expects, we can provide a list of what's necessary. So, fire blankets, fire extinguishers, make sure your pool fence is in good order if you've got a swimming pool, those sort of things. So all the standard safety things around for caring for young people. And then if all of those come through all good and ready to go, then we go into the interview stage, which is the final stage. And again, this is where your availability is really valued, because the assessment interviews, there's 3 or 4 home visits by an assessor that comes out. That assessment lasts about 2 or 3 hours. Each visit, just to go through a range. The department has set a particular assessment tool that needs to be worked through for you to become a foster carer, and so that we work through on home visits. So the more available you are to have those home visits in relatively short space of time, if that's possible, it can move a lot quicker. Once those assessment interviews are completed, then the assessor goes away and writes up the assessment, which then gets read by myself to ensure that everything's in its place. At that point, if I've got any further questions, it might come back to the assessor to make a few more phone calls with you to talk over anything that might stand out. And then once it's signed off, from my perspective, it then goes on to the Carer Approval and Registration Unit, which is with the Department of Child Protection. And they then go through the assessment again, and it might come back again with a few more questions to answer off on, but it is ultimately their final say to tick the boxes as to becoming a foster carer. So now I suppose we are at the point of how long does it take? To some degree, it really is up to you as applicants. It's about how long it takes you to be able to free up your time to attend the required trainings and open up your home to an assessor to come forward. But once we've commenced the screening stage, which is filling in all those application forms and getting all the checks done, we aim to get it through and into the Carer Approval and Review Unit by within 3 months. Once it's submitted to the Department of Child Protection, it sometimes takes a little bit, you know, it basically we're at the mercy of when they're able to get to it to be able to approve it. So the next thing is for you to start to think about, is this the right time for you? Do you have time to commit to the training? Do you have time for someone to visit for all the assessment interviews? Are there other members of your family supportive of this decision that you're making? Because of course a foster child comes into your home and becomes part of the wider family ideally as well. And also, if you've had your own particular challenges in life and upheavals or, you know, crisis points in your life, have you actually managed and worked through those to a point where you feel like you've got something to offer in that space rather than to need to protect yourself in that space? So all of those kind of questions come up in the assessment process, and you reflect on, you know, what your life has been like and how you've moved through and gotten yourself to a place where you're able to offer something to a young person. So that's kind of where we're at in the whole, is this the right time for you? Next thing that I'm going to go through is just a bunch of frequently asked questions, and then open up. If those frequently asked questions don't answer your questions, please feel free to pop your questions in the chat box and Kerry and I will come to it. The first frequently asked question that we have is, can I take a foster child on holidays? And I'm going to throw this over to Kerry. I've done enough talking and Kerry goes on lots of holidays, so she can answer this one.
Of course you can take your foster child on holidays. So if it's like intrastate, so just in South Australia, you don't need to get approval or permission to take them on a holiday as long as you're in this state. If you are travelling interstate, you do need to get permission and normally need to give about 3 weeks notice so that they can, so that DCP can get the approvals done and a memo done for the minister. And you can also take a child on an overseas holiday, but you'll need to give them about 6 months notice for that. And if you were seeking a passport for a child, I would actually request it, you know, 9 to 12 months in advance. So if you are planning on taking a foster child overseas, really think in advance, because it's the passport that takes a long time, especially given they need to get parental consent. And birth parents don't necessarily need to say, yes, it's okay, because the minister can override that decision, but it is a process that needs to be undertaken. Does anyone have any other questions about that question or the way I answered?
I can't see the all good to go.
All good, yep.
So the next question is, where do I get to choose which school they go to? Ultimately, the department has the final say, but of course, depending on where you live. If a child's in only for a short period of time, then quite often the child stays in whatever school they were in the first place, and the department supports with transport to get to and from. But if the child's going to be with you for an extended period of time, absolutely you're consulted around what the best school is. Also, just recently, the Catholic education private schools have opened up a whole range of scholarships for our children and young people in foster care. So young people can attend on application for a scholarship. So yes, essentially we try and keep it. If your children are going to a school and you want the foster child to go to the same school, quite often it's a process to get there, but yes, you get to choose, for it to fit with you. Do you get a choice in what child comes to live with you? Absolutely, you get certainly consulted. The process these days is that when we get a referral for a young person requiring a placement, and we have a look at foster care number A, B and C, we will work out which one we feel that child might match best. And then your allocated child and family practitioner will come out to you and talk to you about that young person, and you get to sort of say whether or not you feel comfortable moving forward from there, and it's a process of placement. So yes, you do get to know who it is that we're considering as a match, and to say. The next question is, are they allowed to call me mum and dad? Again, we'd like to try and, sorry, you've gone backwards there. There we go. We do like to encourage foster carers to let the child make their choice. Sometimes the minute they walk in the door, they're calling you mum and dad. Other times it takes quite some time to feel comfortable. There's also auntie and nan and other names that young people might choose to call you. But yes, especially if they want to call you mum and dad and you're comfortable with that, we would most certainly support that process. Are there any restrictions on pets? There aren't as such. We would have some additional safety issues around if you had any venomous snakes or reptiles that you might have in your home. Somebody said, no, you can't have a shark in the back swimming pool and things like that. But for the most part, no huge restrictions on pets, but also needing to understand that you've got to be mindful that a young person may not have been around pets or may have experienced some horror, some trauma with certain pets. So just to be mindful on the way that we introduce our pets to young people that come into our care. But essentially no major restrictions as long as you're clean and tidy with it. So if you are a crazy cat lady, you can have a foster child as well, providing your home is clean and tidy and suitable for children as well as cats.
Avril, we have a question.
Yes.
Sorry. What age group are hardest to get carers for?
Well, we would say probably from about the age of 13 through to 16, 17 are our most difficult placement. Would you agree, Kerry?
Yes, that would absolutely have been my answer as well. It's the children that are in the adolescent phase that, sometimes their behaviours can be very, very challenging.
Yeah, and what we always find in that space is whilst they're going through your standard hormonal changes for physiologically for a young person moving into adolescence, and the behaviour that sits around all of those hormonal changes, but on top of that they've got the extra layer of trauma and the way their brain has developed, which we provide a whole range of training around trauma and attachment and what the impact of abuse and neglect is on young people. So the way, and that's where I say it's counterintuitive the way we parent children in that space. You know, a lot of children who get sent to their rooms or grounded, have punishments and consequences. None of that works for children of trauma, especially in the adolescent space. So there are other ways that we coach and work towards teaching foster carers how to respond. Is there any other
We've got
questions?
other questions too. Lots of them.
Excellent.
So, do my own children need to be older or younger than the foster child? So it would depend on whether you are wanting to do specialist or general foster care, or whether you're just wanting to provide respite. And how old does my youngest child have to be before I can foster? Again, it will depend on the type of care that you're going to be providing. But if you're looking at providing specialist care, we would want your own child to be probably a school-age child if you're looking at an older child.
Yeah, for the most part, through the assessment process and all the talk that happens and the conversations that you have whilst you're being assessed, by the time you come around to the end of the assessment, you get a real clear idea of, you know, where your skills and abilities and willingness sits to provide care. Nothing is a straight no in foster care. There's always room to talk about it a little bit more and explore the options. So if you do have a young baby, you know, what does that look like? It ends up sort of having to be spoken about, sort of what does it look like when that child needs your attention, but you've got a foster child as well. So when everybody's comfortable with the way that you're able to respond or feel that you've got the capacity to be able to provide care to whatever age group, it's all negotiable to, you know, for the most part.
Somebody has asked if they can still foster if they don't have their full driver's license, currently on provisional due to a previous medical issue, but their partner has their full license. Yes, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, there's no problems or restrictions at all. Yeah, you don't even have to have a driver's license. Yeah. If you lost your driver's license because you stole a car and was driving it unregistered and unlicensed and you weren't able to ever drive again, we might have to look at that and see whether or not how that resolved itself before we move forward in the assessment process. But if it is due to a medical condition of some description, or you just haven't got around to having your license, you know, not a problem at all.
Could you start as being a respite carer and see how you go first? Absolutely. And for a lot of people that come through the assessment process, we would actually recommend that they provide respite first if they're unsure about what they really want to do. Anything else to add to that one, Avril?
No, I think you've covered that off, yes.
There's another question. I'm 22 and we would love to foster. Would this be a barrier for me? I have my own son who's 2 years old.
No, it's not a barrier. What I absolutely would suggest that you make that phone call or fill in for the callback, and they can talk through sort of, a lot of it's got to do with your own life experience and your capacity and ability. Like at 22, you know, some people can be quite immature at 22, and then other people have had a different sort of traverse through life, you know, are well and truly wiser and, you know, amazing to like my 22-year-old that's only just moved out of home. I wouldn't probably support that process, but please, by all means, get the call back and have the conversation with the screening unit to find out whether or not it's for you. And sometimes you can start this process and just move through it at a pace that might enable you, you know, you'll get closer to the age of 25 anyway, but it is very negotiable, that age range.
There's a question for me, and it says, what's the best thing about being a foster carer and what's the hardest thing I've experienced? So I would have to say the best thing about being a foster carer is to see how amazing my own children have included our two little people as part of our family. My whole family has just taken on these children as though they're a part of our family. Like, we've had them both since they were babies, so that possibly makes a bit of a difference. But my adult children would not consider the foster children anything different than their sisters. Also, I have worked really hard to maintain a relationship with the children's birth parents. And so for Christmases and birthdays, we have get-togethers so that they can see their children on those occasions. The hardest thing that I probably have experienced is our youngest little girl. Like I said before, she has got some extensive medical issues and disability, and she has undergone a lot of surgeries in her life. And although she's very, very resilient, it's very hard to go through that with her and experience that. And, you know, I often just wonder, you know, how people cope that have got multiple children with disabilities or medical issues. But yeah, I mean, she's an amazing little girl. She's so incredibly resilient. But yeah, that's probably the hardest thing that I've experienced being a foster carer, is sometimes seeing the children hurt. Someone said, is it hard to have to deal with a child's birth family? Look, I can only talk about personal experience in this situation. I've got a good relationship with both birth families. It's never been an issue for me. I think it's really important for children to know their identity and to know where they've come from. But yeah, I wouldn't say that it's been difficult at all.
I think that there's different ways of doing right at the beginning sometimes of a placement of a young child. If the child's just recently been removed, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to build the relationship with the birth parents, and there's got to be a willingness to understand that and work out ways that you can work with the little person that's in your care, because sometimes the birth parents can let them down and not turn up to an access, or do and say some things that can be a little bit difficult to navigate sometimes. So with the right support around, you know, it's certainly not insurmountable. But it can, you know, at the beginning, when the parents trying to get to know you, but also feeling ashamed or shame around the fact that they're unable to care for the child or not allowed to, you know, so there's all sorts of dynamics and emotions that come into play in that. So it's not easy. I think I had a foster carer sort of say right across the board just recently to me that foster care across the board is not an easy thing to do. It's quite challenging, but it's not scary. That, you know, it is something that you can get. You've got the help and the support out there. You just have to learn and be open to asking for it. So it's not frightening, but it is challenging.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of the challenges as well with birth family is that, you know, for the once a month that some children get to see their family, their birth family want to, you know, spoil them and give them treats, and you know, in a normal family that's not ideal when you're taking a child home after it's had lots of sugar and soft drink and been spoiled, and taking them home to your own family and your own children and trying to explain and trying to manage that behaviour. So I mean, it does come with its challenges. But in terms of navigating the system, use the support that is provided to you. Really, really important. Okay, more questions. Do you or providers assist with things such as cots, clothes, etc.? Currently, my family in Melbourne gets support with this, and I wonder if it's the same within SA. So whilst we don't have material items that we can help with, the Department of Child Protection certainly can help with those items. They can also help with funding for those items, but there's also other organisations that help people, either disadvantaged people or people that are just fostering for the first time that don't necessarily have everything set up ready to go. So there are organisations that we can put you in touch with to be able to help. Another question, what happens to foster kids who don't get a family? Some of them
that
go
one's
into
a hard one.
Yes, it is. Some of those children go into residential care. Some of them are in rotational care. Some of them are in commercial care. Anything you want to add to that one, Avril? It's not a thing that we like to think about too much. We'd like to think that we have a family for every child, but that doesn't necessarily.
So if we get ourselves in a position, of course, there's a number of different agencies that provide foster care. So a referral will go to each and every agency to look through what their availability or capacity is to provide a carer for that child. If they can't, there's the residential care, which is houses that are set up for young children with residential care staff. Essentially the children stay in the house and the staff move through the house. So it's called rotational care in the sense that there's no primary caregiver. It's a number of staff assigned to that particular house. In those, the next step down from that, which the department's moving away from, thankfully, for long, is commercial care that Kerry mentioned. Commercial care is where we find the department goes out and finds a bed and breakfast house, rents a little house for a period of time, and then seeks an agency like a care agency to put carers in there. Those carers are less trained than what they in residential care or foster care, and again, it's a rotational care experience. For children. And then frantically, there's an enormous amount of pressure when children are in those situations for us to really look hard and try and find somewhere for that child to be placed. I noticed that Sarah has asked, can I go through the process now and then decide that I'll be able to provide care? Or once we're through the process, do we need to be ready and available at all times? Absolutely, you get to say when you're ready to provide care, and what we will try and do if you get through the assessment process, what we tend to do is say remain open to possibilities if you're comfortable to be open to possibilities, because we can come to you with an option, with a range of options, and just sort of say, would you consider, this in terms, I think there was a question before, is can I start off as a respite carer? Sometimes people want to start off as just, doing that short-term or respite care. And that also provides an opportunity that once a child's come into the placement and they're working with the child and working to move the child on to wherever they need to go to next, then they can take a breather and sort of sit back and reflect on how that worked, and then decide what, whether or not they want to try another placement. What we don't want to see is carers coming in going, yes, give me a long-term child, and really wanting to have that long-term placement. So we work really hard and put a long-term placement in, and then the carer goes, actually, this isn't quite what I wanted. And we've got to think about the young person and what the impact on the young person is about making that placement. So there's a lot of things to take into consideration as an agency, and as program manager and carer practice managers, we do have a lot of experience in matching and understanding what the needs are.
I've got some more questions here.
So how there any?
Sorry.
Yep. Go.
You want me to go? Yep. How popular is fostering from birth to 2 years?
Pretty bloody popular. There's a lot of people that come in wanting to foster a child from birth to 2 years of age. Of course, that is a delightful age range to provide care for. And we do find there is a trend now that the department seems to be acting a lot sooner in ensuring children and young people's safety. So there is some other, children are coming into care a bit younger. Of course, we do like to try and stretch out that age range a little bit more. To, if somebody wants young people, perhaps 0 to 4, we will challenge our carers that are saying we just want a baby, and we will ask for older, if they'll consider older children. But a lot of foster carers start their journey saying that they want a little one.
Yep. And would it be difficult to get a placement of a baby from birth?
Once you're registered, it's not particularly difficult. Sometimes we look at and need to see and understand the motives of why we want to a placement from birth. We do have, and it's relatively regularly that we do get requests for placement, but generally those babies have very, very high medical needs from birth. The department will try as hard as they can to preserve placement with biological family, but sometimes with parents with intellectual disabilities and children with really high physical or medical needs, sometimes that's not possible. So there is an extra layer of complexity of taking on newborn babies.
That's all the questions I've got at the moment. Oh, here we go. What ages could you possibly get when doing respite, and do you have to be ready in the sense of cots or a normal bed if they're not over the if they are over the age when a cot is not needed? I think Avril mentioned before that we would always take into consideration what carers are wanting. So you would generally give us a preference of the age of the child that you would want to care for or provide respite for. And so generally you would be ready if you were looking for a baby to be able to provide respite for, then you would have the cots or the furniture. Or if you're wanting an older child, then, you would have the bed ready.
Tends to be that if you are being registered to provide care for 0 to 2, as was requested, there's another layer of assessment that needs and training that needs to go on under there. So there's safe infant care practices that need to be, you need to complete that training. And part of the foster care approval is, the questions from the department is the carer set up to be able to take a child? So if you're committing to caring for that age group, then it's expected that you would furnish your home in a way that that would with a cot to manage that age group. Sometimes the department will pay for the car seats or the baby capsule kind of thing. Things are negotiable to some extent. If it's an emergency situation and you've just become approved and you haven't actually got it and we really need the placement, sometimes we can go to the department and go, well, we've got a carer, they just don't have the right furniture at the moment. Can you support with that? And if the department says yes, they can, whack, there's reimbursement and all sorts of things that can go with that. But on placement, there's a setup. You get a setup payment when it's an emergency space, which provides you with, the money to reimburse you for all the extra stuff that you might have to buy to set up a placement quickly. Is emergency short-term care a good way to start, or do you need more experienced carers for that? Emergency care can be quite challenging. You are often being asked to care for a young person that has just been removed from a dangerous situation, or a placement breakdown where a carer has said that they're no longer able to provide care. So the child is in a heightened and more distressed state. So you do need to have the capacity and the skills to be able to be calm in those situations and provide a warm and nurturing space for that child to to land safely. Certainly we have carers that are immediately approved to provide emergency and short-term care. I think the one thing that we've got that's to be realistic about is quite often our emergency and short-term placements, it's not unusual for them sometimes to turn into long-term placements as well. So we do have some carers that are really firm that they are only short-term and only emergency placements. So after a period of, sort of maximum 6 months, they're going, this child needs to. So it's a holding space for a child in a safe space while the department works out where they can place the child from there. So yes, you probably need to be a little bit more resilient in that space, but certainly you don't need to be massively experienced. Once again, we do with our child and family practitioners provide as much support as we can in those areas. Respite is
how long is respite usually? You go.
Yeah. It's just so how respite's usually just over the weekend or a week during the school holidays for the most part. So we've got respite carers that say they've got 3 weekends a month they can look after a young person, and that young and generally we have 3 different young person people on each weekend. That is Kerry would like to answer this question live. That's an interesting. Sorry, I'm just learning this new space. But up to respite's available up to 3 weeks. You can do a 3-week respite period as well. So if a carer is going into hospital for something and they need someone to look after the child for a couple of weeks, you can provide respite for that extent. Right, have we got the link in the chat box to make sure that everyone has got access to the link if they want to?
There's another question too.
Do you collect the person from the carer and return them once respite is up? Well, that's negotiable as well. The department does sometimes provide transport. What we do like to build connections between carers. So there's kind of a shared thing where you can go and take, meet halfway or, So again, it's negotiable, but for the most part, we do like to try and make it as normal as possible. So getting a volunteer or somebody else coming to pick up the child to take them doesn't seem much like a home or natural environment. So we want to try and keep it as normative and natural as possible. So what might happen when you're, if you're going to send your kids off to the grandparents for the weekend, however you would normally do that in a biological family is the way we would prefer it to happen in foster care. One of the things that foster children absolutely always state as something that is difficult for them to manage as a foster child is the fact that they feel like they are treated differently or shuffled from house to house, and they've got workers and volunteers and they feel very different. So the more we can make them feel part of a family, the more we're moving into a space of being able to heal and help them grow and reach their full potential. Whew. Have we run out of questions is the next. When will I get a call back usually? Usually within about 2 days, 2 or 3 business days. We try and get, once you've filled in that callback form, we try and get onto that as quickly as possible. Also for you to I didn't mention this before, maybe it was mentioned when I was out trying to reconnect, but this particular session, as poor as it started, my apologies, has been recorded. You can be rest assured I'm never going to go back and have a look at this one, but this will be sent to you in your email address for you to watch through again and listen. And if you don't necessarily want to fill in the callback straight away, you can go back and listen to to this presentation, yes, that'll be sent through to the email address that you registered to attend this event on. So I think that pretty much ends it for tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for bearing with me. Lucy, will it come from an unknown number in case I missed the call? A message will be left if you've got a message bank, which will provide you with a number to call back on, and it's a 1300 number. It's also on our website and Facebook page as well if you want to anticipate the call. So yes, that sort of leaves it here for now. Thank you very much, as I said, for your patience in getting this started, and my apologies. I'm certainly going to have to make sure I've got a better internet connection next time we start. But thanks very much, everybody, and feel free to share our Facebook page and what you've learnt tonight with your networks, and we will hopefully see you in the assessment space.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Right, are we going to get to stay?